Hello, hello. Welcome to Mahogany Honey Podcast. Kareem's in the house.
Hi.
I love you so much. Anyway, she is a foster care specialist and she's been doing social work and she's been in the field since 2014. Me and Kareem met while we were both in our prime, just babies being initiated into the
Yep.
social work field, being thrown to the wolves and not knowing. But luckily, we had each other to kind of just navigate those spaces. And so I'm so happy to introduce her to you guys. And Kareem, take it away. Let us know a little bit on your background.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexa, for inviting me to be here with you today. So a little bit about me. As Alexa mentioned, I have been in foster care for many, many years, since 2014. I do have a master's degree in forensic psychology because my dream was to go into the FBI. That failed because I fell in love with foster care back in 2014. I started working at a shelter, kind of like as a parent. So I was getting paid to bathe the child, read a book, cook dinner, do laundry. And then obviously, I continued to grow as my love for foster children started to grow and started becoming a guardian ad litem, advocating for children, falling in love with the court system, hating it sometimes, and then just moving forward to prevention. I did some time in prevention for child abuse, where I learned a lot more than I thought I could possibly learn. And now, as Alexa mentioned, I am a foster care specialist where I review the cases of many, many of our children and young adults that come into the system here in Miami-Dade County. And, we make decisions based on what we learn about their case. So that's a little bit of me in a nutshell. I can't wait to have this conversation with you, Alexa.
Yeah, so as you guys know, I'm very passionate about just speaking about foster care. My thesis was literally on bridging the gap between educators and social workers because I witnessed as a guardian ad litem so many disparities going on that I wish I could have just prevented and I saw it happening and I felt like I saw a loophole there that I just wanted to close. And so me and Kareem have joined powers and still trying to make that, build that bridge and just continue to have efforts in that area. So I want to start with giving everyone kind of just like the facts of what is the history of foster care and how race really plays into this. So this is a fact that race has played a major role in the growing gap between foster care and adoption. So during the civil rights era, poor children of color were denied services because they were more involved in foster care cases than any other race, predominantly African Americans. Studies have revealed that those who left foster care without being linked to families have a greater chance of experiencing homelessness, which we see that many times. Once they age out, that's one of the prime things that we have seen when they're going through that transitional phase. Unemployment and incarceration as adults compared to young adults in the general population. So, and that's definitely a higher risk it also puts women in higher risk for early pregnancies who have been in foster care and an even greater possibility to see their children placed in foster care as well.
So we still see that today. You mentioned civil rights, but we're seeing it now, and it's 2020.
2020, and we're still fighting this battle. Also another thing is that marginalized populations, predominantly Blacks and Latinos, are more prone to experiences disadvantages in economics, which we know this, educating, housing, healthcare, and etc. Especially when you have immigrants coming on from their other countries and they're trying to figure out how to navigate the United States. And most of the time, unfortunately for those who come here illegally, they're put into positions of powerlessness. And we continue to see systematic oppression, families being torn apart, which is definitely another topic and that's high in the media right now. And unfortunately, these people have experienced discriminatory practices and a lack of representation or insight into multicultural approaches, um, because of just the old systematic ways of like handling situations that we send in and out. Especially, I mean, in South Florida, it's really in your face because we have a lot. I mean, Miami has a high population of Latinos. We know this, and just people of color. And like I like to say, and I've always emphasized, we are the majority, even though they say that we are considered a minority, but that's actually very prevalent over there. But overall, I do want to say that this topic speaks nationwide, especially for states like Texas, states like California, who do have a high Latino population as well. Um, Most of the states from early stage focus on how much like we have to learn in regards to just like culture, and like it speaks on privilege as well, and how we implement those systematic approaches across all diverse populations who attend a public educational institution. Those who come from a powerless foster youth background have already faced challenges of identity and are to conform to the code, opposed to an individual who is accustomed to supremacy. Mm, some of the effects of racism are, lacking single family households, proper education, racial inequities, lack of financial literacy. I remember so many times like going over to some of the kids, like when they were ready to age out, doing like that whole process and being like, okay, did you do your financial literacy? And it's just like something that like I wish was taken a little bit more serious. Mm-hmm. However, like it's one of the things that we should, I don't know, do a little bit better on. Then to continue disparities in among Latinos and Blacks, lack of opportunity services that are quality based in inner city. So that's one of the things that I know that you wanted to touch on, is just like the quality of work that we're providing. Like many times, some of the providers that some of these agencies we're working with, we definitely were seeing how there was a lot of turnover, whether they had a new therapist or another therapist, or just like it was prolonging just the case plan and just overall the judicial process of reunification, and just bringing these kids
Mm-hmm.
either reunifying them back with their family members, or just overall getting them the, which is more important, providing them the insight and education that they need in order to push along and move forward in society.
Absolutely, Alexa. You mentioned, I mean, right now, the brief history that you gave us, it's pretty much today, 2020, what I see every day in my job. There's still, like you mentioned, young adults trying to transition, and, their rate of homelessness, the fact that they don't have appropriate housing, the fact that we start so late in getting all the services to start financial literacy, becoming, being able to drive. That's such an important thing, but we're starting them so late. So our youth, they're really turning 18 without the tools that they need. But that's a topic for another day for sure. But in terms of, their education and services that are being provided in the inner cities, you can definitely see a difference. First of all, as you mentioned, the rates of Black children or Latino children that are considered minorities are a lot higher in foster care than the predominant race, which would be considered white at this point. So many of the services that we have are not really taking into consideration the cultural component that our children are growing up with. And we're seeing, as a result, labeling a lot earlier on in life. I can tell you, when I worked in prevention and we were asked and trained to do the ASQs, which stands for Ages and Stages questionnaires, which measures the development of a child. Children who've been in trauma tend to score a lot worse than their counterparts. So we're not taking into consideration all of this. We're pushing our kids back from a very early age. Services, which they're great services outside in the community, but unfortunately, because the need is so great, the wait lists are huge. So, we need our kids to be able to have speech. We need our children to be able to have occupational and physical therapy. And, a lot of our kids will not speak at the age of 3, 4 years old, are aggressive. Teachers are very quick to label those children without really realizing, hey, this kid can really communicate. They can speak. Have we done a thorough examination to ensure that we're addressing the core issue instead of just putting bandages around the things that we can see? That's the problem. We are labeling what I can see. If I see a cut, I'm going to put a band-aid on it. But I don't see that you have gangrene under that. And that's the problem. So our services are mediocre. We still need to be able to do better. Mental health services for inner city children, I'm sorry, what are you doing as a therapist? Are you really addressing the trauma, or are we trying to push a child beyond the limits? Are we working with our client, or are we trying to meet the quota for our hours? So are we really doing us the service to the children? Are we really ensuring that the families are ready for reunification when we have parents completing 1 million services and we expect them to do this within a year? And we expect them to work. We expect them to drug test. We expect them to visit. And we put such a high bar that a parent like you and me, who've never been in the system, will probably be unable to successfully complete. I mean, it's a reality. It's a very, very tough reality.
Right. And then I remember just the constant, I know that we have a lot of hearings in order to just provide updates as to what cases, where the case is at, and just figuring out exactly what is this family's progress. And I would be so frustrated when at times, yes, we would speak on behalf of the education. And I know there was some judges who really focused on education and were very adamant about what's going on. But I would recall just being just so distraught on the wait time of just getting the kid in school. Just what are we doing? I understand, and a lot of that has to do in regards to placement, which we can speak on, unfortunately. The fact that some of these children are unfortunately I don't want to use the word bounced around, but something very similar to bounced around, the instability process, that although we try to do the best we can to treat it, to tediously assess these foster parents, there's always going to be, not everyone's really for the real reason of it, and it's not in their heart to really provide that genuine care. At times, I mean, there's ulterior motives at times, but our overall focus is always to ensure that the child is safe in the home. But at times, what happens is that it may look like the child is safe on the outside, but at the same time, these outside factors, especially predominantly, not your overall health, physical health, but also just your education and what you're feeding your mind and what the information that you're taking in. And so again, I don't stand with mediocrity. I'm with you on this fight of just pushing forward, and just, if we have to going back and doing trainings, I feel we need to do an emphasis on just continued training, especially right now, how education is changing, and then we're pushing into the virtual realm. But I do want to harp a little bit on the emotional and spiritual aspect of this. I feel a lot of times we do facts, and I want to stray away from just focusing on that, because I definitely want to emphasize, you and I feel that's how we started. We were just boom, boom, boom. But then we started realizing that can cause burnout as a social worker when you're not able to take a step back and realize, why am I doing this? Absolutely. What's the purpose behind my passion? At times, when your fire burns out, right? Because that's what burnout is, because you overwork yourself, you forget why you're doing this. And so I want to speak on that. And so for me, one of the main things why I jumped into this, I was so passionate about working in the criminal justice field, was the fact that racism is emotionally harmful for everyone. but specifically more so those who continuously have to live it every day. So being put into in a situation already where, let's say you're already in a regular family and you experience that even as an African American or even Latino. Imagine what that looks like with not having your family around or just support and having to deal with racism in foster care and having maybe possibly identity issues. You know, that's not another factor that like it may not be mentioned a lot, but you may be placing an African American child in a Latino home or placing a Latino child in an African American home. Like, that's a conversation to be had. And like, at the end of the day, you have to go back to your main values and your morals and like what basically where your heart lies and making sure you're not doing a disservice to this service.
Yeah.
And definitely asking yourself, like, does this align with my purpose? Am I passionate about this work? You know, really be transparent. Is this really going to work for me? Is it okay to change my mind? Like, it's okay, like, to change your mind. I feel like a lot of times we get fixated on this is how the world is, right?
Yep.
This is how what I think, and this is what my overall idea, and then you put people in the box of like, this is how African Americans are, or this is what they like, or this is what Latinos like, and this is what, and we need to again remember that you may be doing a disservice to yourself if you're not in that space to self-reflect.
And educate.
And educate. Do you have any examples of those? Can you think of one, or maybe where you've seen a circumstance where race was kind of just a factor?
Well, the only thing I can think of was when the cases were coming in for shelter, and there was this very specific case. Obviously, I cannot give a lot of details, but it came in for something so cultural that we had not, you know, as the community, the court system had not really educated on, like, per se, just to give you an example, like discipline, you know, in Hispanic households, like I was disciplined with the chancleta. It is not okay, but it's a cultural phenomenon to say, or a cultural something that just happens, and that it's very common in our households. But nobody has really taught our parents how to raise children the way that, you know, in a way that is not traumatic for them. So when we're having cases that are coming in because, you know, the discipline got out of hand, you know, we're not really addressing the issue. We're not really addressing it as the fact that it is a cultural thing. It is something that we need to re-educate the parents, because they're coming in here, as you mentioned, you know, being the minority, they're not really coming with power. They're coming with what they know. So if I don't educate a parent that is just coming here from anywhere in South America, for example, and letting them know, like, hey, here, hitting your children is not okay, it can lead you to issues, that's a cultural issue. That's something that I'm not informing myself. And if I don't address that as a social worker, I'm going to put this kid back in a household where the parent has not really understood the can and cannot do's that will not land this child back in foster care. I mean, and we can talk about this all day, but at the end of the day, you know, education is important. You know, you have to be in it. And a lot of, you know, we have a great, you know, like social workers are leaving every day. You know this, Alexa. You know, it's a horrible burnout. But also, like you mentioned, like, are you here for the right reasons? You know, are you here because you actually want to help out and you're willing to put your biases and your assumptions aside and not label a child just because they're African American? You know, I cannot tell you outside, you know, a black child walks in and you clutch your purse like you're clutching your pearls. Like, no, let's delete that stigma. This is not the way anybody should be treated. Get to know someone, you know, and that's what we're lacking to do.
Yeah, and also having those conversations even at court and like while you're waiting for your hearing. I would just like, you know, at times like you would see some of these foster kids, and one of my kids were, I remember like sitting down with them and they were just like looking around and they were like, why does everyone look like me? You know, that's a hard question. If you're as a social worker and you're sitting there yourself, being a person of color too, you're like, why are my people You know, why is it
Mhm.
that it's predominantly my people coming in and out of this courtroom? What
It's
is going
money,
on?
honey. It's money. You and I know that other people from other cultures are doing exactly the same thing to our children as we're seeing in foster care, but they're not being called. DCF is not being called in on them. Why? They have the resources to hide it. They live in predominantly, more affluent neighborhoods.
Protected neighborhoods where pretty much
Exactly.
everything could be hush hush,
Mm-hmm.
because we would see that as well. That's a true thing, where
Yeah.
the similar situations are treated differently because of where you may be living or what you look like and what your circumstances may be at the time, and the
Yep.
support that you have. And again, that speaks into foster care. Imagine being a person of color, already at a disadvantage, lacking support because even though you may have your social workers, yes, you have your social worker, you may have a mentor, you may have an educational surrogate, you have your teachers, you have pretty much you have your community. Yes, we understand that. But at the same time, you go home to your bed. You go home. This child
Mm-hmm.
continues to live life wondering and pondering and trying to build attachments to and make a reality of what they see going on. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
conversation that like definitely we need to continue having. And how you are a role model. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, like many times, like I know as a social worker we would get distressed and just in the caught up of like the in and out of like having to bring this kid to court, having to bring this kid back to their home or whatever it is. And it's like in those conversations, in that process that you're doing this, like you may not realize that your attitude and just like your overall behavior, no matter how many years you spent doing this, kids are picking up on how you react in work and
Yep.
just your overall professionalism. So like your lack of self-efficacy, your own self-esteem in regards to your own self-worth, you're you might be exposing these kids to actually risky behaviors and not even realize it. And
Yep.
so that's why I emphasize so much on like please realize when you're burnt out and when you need a break. And I understand that especially in cities where you need to work and
Mm-hmm.
you are trying to put food on the table as a social worker, prevalent, it's so important to have faith that there are alternative ways to be on the front line if that line is not for you. If you know that you're not able to execute it the way that this work is requiring you to do it. Because
Mm-hmm.
you know what? Maybe when you do start taking a stand and and stand up as a social worker, like, no, we should not be treating these kids like this, or no, I should not be performing my job like this. Maybe that's when the system actually tries to make a change or make a difference to start realizing, wait, hold up, why do we have so much turnover? Or how come that this for a
Yep.
second, maybe this approach is not working. Maybe it's very forceful the way that we're doing things right now. And so sorry, I just had to vent. That was like I've
No,
seen
I
so many of
respect
my
it.
social workers like under stress, and I'm like, girl, I feel you. And like you forget at times like that you're at work, but at the same time you got to catch yourself
Yeah.
and just remember that like again is are you burnt out?
You're required to
Um,
do so much for a child as a case manager, transportation, visitation, case notes. You don't have one child, you have 25 plus. That's that's a lot. That's a lot. And like you mentioned, put yourself, in a place where your mindset and your emotional self, that they're okay, that you feel supported, that you feel that you matter. I mean, I could not be more grateful from where I am, coming from a place that was literally burning me out to a place where I can breathe and I can still do what I love to do, because social work is not a paycheck. If you're thinking I'm going to become a social worker because I'm going to get some bad money and I'm going to be swimming in it,
yeah,
you might want
okay.
to wake up from
You're
that
gonna be
dream.
swimming in shallow waters.
Absolutely. This is all a matter of heart. Your heart needs to be in it. Our kids need case managers who are willing to stand up and advocate, who are willing to go to school. And education is so vital because you know what? the majority of our children are coming from households that their parents have not even graduated or completed high school. Some of them come with like, an elementary education. They may not know how to read or write. This might be the first kid that they have that is actually on their route to maybe getting a high school diploma, and that needs to be celebrated. And we need to prepare the parents as well as not only the children, because the minute I put those kids back home, how is a parent going to properly advocate if they have not attended one meeting, one staffing with the teacher because they have not been invited? Because you know what? Parents take a back seat. This is a case manager's job. No, no, no. This is a parent's job. Your rights are still intact. Let me invite you. Let me educate you. We are missing the education portion when it comes to children in foster care.
Right. We definitely are going to speak on accountability and how, as community members and just professionals, we do need to take accountability, because it starts it's not only in the social work criminal justice field. We're going to speak on how educators and just also the top-down approach is definitely prevalent and relevant to accountability in this issue. But I want to jump into social stigmas among these individuals and what it looks like seeking relief. Through the churches and pastors, and also just like your family, and finding community and how important it is to allocate resources, not just for these children, but also for yourself as a worker and continuing your profession. And also like seeking counseling, not as well. Like I know that at times like we're so busy caught up in our own like life, and we may not know how to have the best approach, and we may not feel comfortable during trainings. Try to, if you can, also like seek resources that you can personally talk about your own experience with race as a worker in the foster care system, because that's prevalent too, and that's a conversation that we're not having. I want to jump into, because and this goes in context into how it affects us and what can we do. And I just want to speak a little bit on early child development labeling, and when it comes to just like the developmental milestones that we want to accomplish for them. So if you want to speak on that.
Sure, absolutely. So as I had mentioned briefly before, we have tools that are used to measure our children in order to know where they are developmentally. So it's important that, we take a look at what is being provided, how those tools are being administered. I mean, I can tell you now, based on my experience, when a tool like that is being administered without the child in front. That's how serious it is, because, as you mentioned, people who are filling out this questionnaires are so probably burned out. But those tools need to be done with the child in front. You need to ensure that the child is able to do the things that they're able to do. Otherwise, services that should be available for them will not be. How does this affect us? I mean, it affects everybody in the community. Those are tax dollars, that are being wasted or spent in a way that should not be spent. I mean, if you want to talk money, this is probably the biggest portion of it, is services that our kids should be getting. Right. When they go and as they continue to grow, they have IEPs, they have 504 plans. When I'm a social worker, I want to ensure my child has everything that they could possibly have, because it's very easy to label. It's very easy to say, well, you know what, this kid has ADHD or has, behavioral and emotional issues. They don't like authority. We're already labeling kids as to how they will be when they're adults. And I have a personal experience. I have a great ex-coworker of mine who was a foster child herself, and she was labeled with PTSD and ADHD as a minor. She is now in college, and she is trying to get these services out of her record because this girl is so smart. Her IQ, she went and did an evaluation as an adult. Her IQ is great. But why have we labeled her? Was it because she was in foster care? Was it because trauma was exhibiting itself in a way that ADHD should show up? Or was it because the services that she was getting were not what she needed? Are we really providing the services based on what a child needs? Or are we just wasting taxpayer money? Are we wasting services that could be provided to another child if we were actually taking into consideration what a child needs? So I would say that that's how it affects us. I mean, it affects each individual child very differently. There's services, SSI benefits that a child who actually has these needs could have. But if we're not providing the right services and we're not diagnosing the children in the correct way, taking into consideration what they need, an issue that started as young as 1-year-old, 2-year-old is not following them for life. How is that okay?
Which was not their fault. Which was not their fault to begin with. It was basically a circumstantial. And my thing is this, like, are labels there as a means to help us navigate how to help, or are we dehumanizing one another by doing these labels? Because labels are, we need to also remember that labels are important for certain reasons, but when they start actually affecting and preventing us from helping one another, because they can also be helpful, but they can also not, and actually broaden the gap that we're trying to close. I've seen this happen when, in regards to confidentiality, when I was doing my research, I kept saying, like, why is it that some of these educators, the teachers, don't know that these kids are foster care kids, or they may not even be aware that these are foster care kids, and that they may have that, and that's a disadvantage. Being a foster care child is a disadvantage. And so they may have an idea that this is a child that may not have a lot of support, but they don't know for sure. And I understand the whole concept of, like, we're trying to prevent stigmatization from happening. We want them to be treated just like everyone else in the classroom. But then I think, and I'm like, well, when a child has a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, has an IEP for a 504, and they have these special needs, so why is it not okay to know whether this child is lacking support or not? That's a disadvantage. And
let me ask you, who is going to the meetings? Because if I have a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, or a 504, as a social worker, guess what? You have to go. So are we not asking the correct questions?
Like I said, there's a lot of ambiguity there, and the importance of these child developmental assessments that we do in these ages and stages are very important, not just for research purposes, because research is extensively important. Not only, that's the way that we collect data, and we pretty much know whether something's effective or not. And so we definitely need to be putting an emphasis on that. And additionally, that's the way we get funded. If I cannot see it on paper, guess what? I'm not funding it. Yep. And that's the reality of how things work. Moving on to that, we could probably harp on that. If you want to harp on that one, I know me, and I'll probably. But
I think that this could be a section on its own, because I feel like you and I could have much more conversation. And I think you and I are so passionate about all of this. But yes, just listeners, just keep an ear out for that. You'll be hearing about that a lot more.
So let's put some heat on the community members, and how they contribute, either as an adoptive parent, volunteering, or mentoring towards a nonprofit or any other organization, and how they're also part of this conversation, right? So let's talk a little bit about adoptive parents and the volunteers that I know that you also work with on a day-to-day basis, and how you pretty much educate them on this topic.
Absolutely. So outside from everything that I do, I am also resource for my church, which has now ensured that they have created a ministry for foster parents, and where they're actually finding foster parents out of the community, which is how it should be, because I believe in the African proverb that says it takes a village, and our foster kids need a village. So they need people that are able to step into the foster parent role, knowing first and foremost that the main goal is reunification. Second of all, that these kids should be like your own. They should not be treated any differently. You should be advocating for them. It is not the case manager. Oh, I'm sorry, that's third. Third, it is not the case manager's job to do your job. Meaning, I, as a foster parent, should be taking my child to the doctor. I, as a foster parent, should be taking time off.
Sorry.
Right? I should be taking my child to the school meetings, participating in all of this. You are a parent. It is the second word in your title. Foster parent. So if you're unable to do that, and you're unable to train people in your community to become parents for these children, to step up and really say, you know what? I am going to love on this child like I love on my own kids, or how I wish I would have my own kids if I'm unable to have them, So the training has to be there. It has to be about co-parenting. It has to be about what we do. And I think that that's something that, not to toot our own horns, but we do pretty well in terms of just allowing them to learn, because foster parents need to be trained, that they need to do continuous education, because it is not just I pass my license, I do my license every year or every so often whenever it expires, and I will never figure out or learn about human trafficking or racism or development, all of these things that are so crucial in the life of our child. The other part that we work on is with other volunteers. This is in terms of what I do in my job, but these volunteers are trained to learn what the system is and how to look at different things. So like if you bring me a child and you ask me like, hey, let's go ahead and review what's going on with this child's life, you best believe we're going from mental health to education, to disability, to placement, to who they are, to what they like, to their education, to their mental, to their medical, you name it, we are talking about it. We're also, and I'm sorry, Alexa, this is another topic. We're also discussing sexuality because it is so important, especially for young adults, to really figure out what their sexuality is and to feel supported if they're part of the LGBT plus community. So we do all of that, and all of our volunteers are properly trained to be able to assess the situations and make orders based on what we have learned. We want our children to excel. We just don't want them to continue in a cycle where abuse is all they know. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. You harped on every single one, and I wanted to touch even a little bit more because you just nailed everything, but on the accountability piece, on how we basically need to be working collaboratively. We all affect each other in some way, shape, or form, because if you have a foster child in your home, you definitely want to know if you're taking care of this child and you're making the efforts to bring them to school, who's educating them? Who's in charge of their education? Are they being educated properly? That's all part of being a foster parent, and also being part of a volunteer, making sure that all of whatever they need in order to holistically function is there, and ensuring that we're holding each other accountable for what we're responsible for. So that may look like, well, if you're a social worker, I'm supposed to be, working on this. Like you said, if I'm a foster parent, like I am supposed to be doing this. And so just pretty much holding each other's hands and like trying to not necessarily point fingers, but trying to find a way of just like collaboratively coming together and acknowledging where the loops are and what needs to be just like, okay, we need to start working on that or pay attention to this.
Yeah.
And also just remember to critically think. You are responsible. Every individual on here has the right to free will. We all have the ability of free will and to think independently and individually. And we don't, and that's what makes us unique and makes it great that we all can come up with solutions, right? To possibly like a problem or any type of issue going on, especially today, and self-reflect and change our mind. So yeah, okay, this is how we were doing it before, but what can we look at now that we can like do differently as we
Every
evolve
child
with the
is so
time?
different that you need to communicate. And I think that's what we're lacking when you talk about the loophole and when you talk about what holes need to be filled. We need to communicate. You know very well how hard it was for you and me to communicate properly with a case manager, with a caregiver, to schedule our visits, to talk to a therapist. You know how hard it is. And if we're not communicating, how am I really addressing this kid?
I'm not sure. And a lot of it too, I feel like, again, goes back to just self-reflecting and critical thinking, not just about the work that you're, not just about, yes, the work that you're doing, but also yourself and self-reflect, like, whoa, am I capable of doing this job, or do I need to shift and be on a different front line? Please, critical thinking is essential to this job. And you're not here just to be a robot and be like, go. No, like you're a leader. You are a leader within this field. Please stop taking a seat. I know that the series is called Take a Seat, but it's only take a seat in order for you to self-reflect. Right now.
Oh, girl, you're preaching right about now.
Listen, is this something that I have faced myself, and I'm holding myself accountable to those moments where I wasn't giving, I was just going. I was just going. Because we've all been there where we were just like, okay, go. It's easier to be on autopilot. It's easier to be on autopilot. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so that goes into looking into your values and looking into your morals and, you know, looking into money. Like we said before too, like the way money is stewarded. I cannot emphasize enough on how the amount of resources, like we said, that are out there. And are we appropriately using them and ensuring that they're being stewarded the right way? And that plays into taking the top-down approach that I spoke with before. You know, during our last training, like, are we looking at who is sitting on the board? Are we looking into who are the directors? Who's directing this? Who's funding this? Elections. Sorry to bring it up, but elections prevalent right now.
Yes,
I want to know what Betsy DeVos. Why are we not talking? Why is that name not being brought up right now into 2020?
Let me tell you, I had the hardest time figuring out what each candidate in my August ballot stood for. Because guess what? They're not compared. At least here in Miami-Dade County, they're not side by side saying, you know, this person believes in this person wants to be a change. You have to do the research. Like you mentioned, election year, just as you would with elections, the same type of research you've got to do to identify resources in your community. And I'm huge on that. Like, you tell me this needs to get done, and I'll give you 5 resources that you can go and run to. Because the money is there. Are you doing what you need to do to ensure that the kids that you're serving are getting what they need? And Alexa has a big point. Who's sitting on those chairs? You know, the ones that have the power. Who is sitting on those chairs?
Right. I want to know what are the new plans on, and do you have foster care kids as part of your discussions? Are they part of your panels? Are you discussing them? I want to know, especially with back to school.
Ooh.
What's your new approach on how to make sure that these kids are not falling in between the gaps?
Are you ensuring that they're getting laptops? Because let me tell you something. Many of the kids that I reviewed had no laptops. That's a call out for you, Miami-Dade County Public Schools. My kids had no laptops.
Wi-Fi? How about Wi-Fi? Hotspot.
Oh, yeah, Wi-Fi. Yes. You know what? It is available. It is accessible. Have you looked? Many internet providers have a low income internet access. Are you, as a social worker, are you, as a foster parent, looking into this? People in APD homes, your children still need to go to school. They still need to learn. I understand that there's different processes and different safeguards that need to be taken into consideration. But if your child is somewhat functional and is still going to school, they should still be provided the tools. So we need to start talking about our kids, because our kids matter. Mic drop. Sorry. They matter.
No, listen, you can drop the mic all day on here. I want to know what guidance counselors are doing. What's your approach to provide support? You know, I'm very interested. Like, have we put the mic to them really quick? What are they struggling with? What are they need training on? How are they still going to be prevalent? I want to know. I really want to know. Maybe that'll be like part of my homework, looking into guidance counselor. Speaking with them, IEP attendance, like, please ensure that, like, that's part of your accountability as a volunteer parent, adoptive parent, etc. Like, or just overall attendance to these PTA meetings if you can attend one.
And let me tell you, kids, now that we're virtual, this COVID has really shed a light on the things that we're not doing in terms of education. Services for kids who have IEPs. I cannot stress this enough. Our kids in the foster care system are falling through the gaps, because you know what's going on? Services that were provided in schools, such as speech therapy, counseling for children with emotional behavioral disabilities, the majority of them are not happening. And this is mandated. You have an educational plan. Ensure that as a caregiver, as a foster parent, as a parent, if your child has an IEP, please just call the school and ensure that they're getting what they need this school year. Many kids have failed. Many kids that last fourth grading period, not good. Kids that had A, B's, and C's are getting D's and F's. You know, we need to really become our advocates for our own kids.
Absolutely. This conversation has been phenomenal. I mean, I think we pretty much tried to cover as much ground as we wanted as possible. You know, towards the end, I always save it for references and just overall takeaways. I have a couple articles and references and things of that matter that I probably want to throw out there. But before I start doing on that, I'm trying to think if there's anything that we left out that we wanted to just like touch on or just mention before we go, and just like the overall importance of like being part of these school committee meetings and just like looking at the staff and attending these. And I feel like, I'm not sure what the website is in Florida, but there are public hearings going on out there in regards to education the school department holds. It would be nice to figure out if they're doing them virtually now, because now you can attend them virtually. Let's say that you didn't want to be stuck in traffic and you didn't want to, now you can. So it'd be nice to figure out the website to that. What we're going to do towards the end is I will add it on. I'll put my information, my Instagram information on here so you guys can know where to find that. I also have a website. Is there anywhere else where they should be looking, or any additional references that you have on the top of your mind, or do we want to add them towards, like?
I mean, I think to me would be a Google search away in terms of just, you know, if you're here local in Miami-Dade County, your Miami-Dade.gov website has amazing resources for everything that we've discussed here today and more. So definitely that's one to look at. My suggestion would be, I am in love and absolutely obsessed with the Educate Tomorrow program. If you're here, if you're local, please go check them out. They have anything from college preparation. They used to have mentoring, but this is something that is very much needed for young adults, which is, as I mentioned before, one of my passions. We need to properly transition them in school. Is a big thing. And just for your little ones, early steps and head start. If you are low income, or if your child, you may feel that they have, they're not developmentally on par, get them evaluated. This shouldn't take more than 45 days for you to get a date for your evaluation. If they tell you longer, you know what's going on. Sorry. And then if you want to just educate a little bit more yourself, I know that, with everything that's going on in 2020, I've had a great chance to educate myself and, everything that stems from racism to homophobia. I am reading a great book, and I cannot stress it enough. I think I've put it everywhere. It's called All Boys Aren't Blue, and it talks about sexuality, especially being a gay Black boy in a Black community. It talks about everything under the sun. It's definitely a blessing to have read that book, because it's going to open your eyes, people. So stay tuned. And Alexa has a bunch of references.
Yes, I definitely have some references, some research references. One of the books that I read back in grad was Revolutionizing Youth. And that book pretty much summed up on how to help inner city kids and just assist and be realistic on approaches and the importance of proximity, which is very prevalent right now, just proximity in general. And not to forget that, because I know a lot of teachers, for those who are not able to be in the classrooms, how to address it virtually and how to just give that extra sensory, how do you call it, engagement, or what's the word I'm looking for? Just, trying to be there in another way that it's felt, that their presence is felt. But no, that's been great, Karem. I thank you so much. That's one of my takeaways, though. I'll mention it again, where to find me. I have changed the name now to how you guys know, to Mahogany Honey Podcast. You can find me on Instagram, just putting that name down, Mahogany Honey. And also my website is still labeled right now as melaninmiamimommy.org. So I will make sure to put any additional information on there in regards to this topic. And thank you so much, Karem.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Please continue to have these difficult conversations. We need more people like you. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. We'll probably continue this an extension of this conversation in the future.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right.
All right. Peace.